Good evening, everybody, and also good evening to all the people that hopefully were patient at home or wherever you are online. We're sorry for the little delay, but now we can start with this roundtable that we called Expanding Protest Event Analyses Through Videos. My name is Sven Hutter. I'm the director of the Center for Civil Society Research here at the WZB, the Berlin Social Science Center. And with me here in the room, you will also see there is a large crowd of people hopefully interested in this topic and not just for waiting for the dinner there to come later, because I also have to let you know that this is the roundtable tonight, but we've already had a full day of discussions here at the conference on exactly this topic, and we will also continue those discussions tomorrow. So also you online, but also the people here in the room that just joined us for the roundtable, please feel free to intervene in our discussions and also give us some food for thought for tomorrow's ongoing debate here. As the title already says, we're really thinking about one of the main workhorses of social movement studies, and that is the systematic collection of protest data, which traditionally, as you will see also in our debate, has very much relied on text sources. Also, not just kind of any kind of text, but over time, it was very much mass media that have been used to come up with these systematic collections of protest events. But we thought, and many of us in the room and many people, of course, also worldwide have thought that the plethora of material now available that is not just text-based in the digital age really also needs us to rethink how we do this kind of endeavor. That's the topic, but before we now go into the discussion, I also want to kind of introduce to you the cast of tonight's show. As you have seen on the program, there were supposed to be 5 main actresses here on stage. Now you can see 4 of them, and on top of that, we even have one person that was not officially announced on the program, because as you know, organizing something in December is always a bit difficult given many reasons why people can't attend. That's why I'm also sending greetings to Antje Scharrenberg and also to Stefan Maltaner, who cannot be with us tonight. But I still have 3 very excellent speakers with me, and the first one to my left is also the co-organizer of this conference. That's Donatella Della Porta. Donatella is professor of political science at the Scuola Normale Superiore. She has also been the founding dean of the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences at the Scuola and is also overseeing the PhD program there. At the same time, she's also leading there the Center on the Study of Social Movements, Cosmos. And I can't introduce all her work, and most of you probably in the room and online will anyways know Donatella. But I just want to tell you that there is yet another new book that is fresh off the press, just came out last month, and it's called Regressive Movements in Times of Emergency, the protests against anti-contagion measures and vaccination during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's just published by Oxford University Press. And it's also one of the bridges, as I will tell you later, why we're actually here tonight. Then on my right, I'm very happy that we also have with us Jennifer Earle. Jennifer is currently also a visiting guest here at the WZB, but more importantly, she is professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Delaware, where she just moved to. Before, she has been at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and then for the last decade at the University of Arizona. I think many of you will also know Jennifer's works on kind of repression, social movement dynamics, but also digital forms of mobilization and the engagement of young people. Jennifer is currently working on a book project where she wants to kind of better understand how the policing of protest actually changed in the moment of the civil rights movement. So we still have to wait a little for that book, but apparently she worked hard now also in Berlin on that book manuscript. But maybe a more recent publication that you want to check out would be Layers of Political Repression, Integrating Research on Social Movement Repression, published in the Annual Review of Law and Social Sciences in 2022. And then last but not least, and we're super happy to have him with us on a very short notice, is Yannis Grimm. Yannis is leading a research group at the Freie Universität Berlin in the Interact Center, the Interdisciplinary Center for Conflict and Peace Research. This group is called Radical Spaces, and that's also what he looks at with a strong focus on the MENA region. So we also have kind of diversity in that regard in terms of the regions we actually study. And I highly recommend to you Yannis' book called Contested Legitimacies, Repression and Revolt in Post-Revolutionary Egypt that has been published by Amsterdam University Press. And I think what he exactly does there methodologically, I guess Yannis will tell us more also in his intervention tonight. So this is kind of the cast. Now just very few words from my side because I have these different hats on. I'm kind of the moderator. At the same time, I'm also the organizer of the workshop, and I'm also one of the co-authors of a paper we kind of discussed tonight, or which is somehow a bit the basis for tonight's discussion. And this paper is having this ambition of bringing videos into kind of the realm of protest event analysis, and has been co-authored by Donatella, Sophia Hunger and Anna Lavizzari. They're also in the room. Maybe they also intervene later on when we kind of have all these critical questions from your side. Now, why are we here tonight? I could give you like 3 reasons for that. One is a very personal reason, because Donatella is one of our fellows at the center and luckily got a prestigious prize from the Humboldt Foundation, which allows her to be here on a very regular basis. And that's why we, of course, also thought we need to use kind of this opportunity, at least from our center side, to also collaborate more closely and kind of extensively over time with Donatella. The second reason is a bit more substantive, that because we both kind of, and many of you probably also were amazed by what happened in pandemic times, that at the beginning we were all kind of expecting a halt on protests, but that was of course not what we saw, but we rather saw the emergence of first quite a broad range of mobilization, but then ever more a focus on so-called anti-contagion movements, anti-vax movements in some countries. In Germany, this so-called Querdenker, lateral thinker movement. And of course, we kind of at our center, but also others, have already set up very good protest event data sets to track kind of what is happening in the German protest landscape and beyond. And for sure, not just this movement, but this movement in particular and this wave of mobilization showed us that it's somehow a bit restrictive if we just focus on what the media present to us. Or it was also very hard to convey to the public what we find out about this movement by just looking at media, because of course it was also highly contested what this media actually portrays, and trust in media and many other institutions was also low in that moment. So that's why we also thought there is so much more material out there to learn what these protests actually were about, how they unfolded, also their diversity, that we kind of had this urge to also incorporate those kind of materials. So this is kind of the interpersonal, the more substantive. But then, of course, we're not the first ones to think about how digital technologies and the spread of information on social media and other platforms actually changes kind of also the craft of how we do social sciences, as many have called it. And that was for sure for us kind of a way to also think about that more broadly. And of course, if you look at the literature, many people use that by now, also in social movement research, and also when we look at kind of protest event scholars that are really interested in the repertoires of protest, how they change over time, they use kind of these technologies, these sources, oftentimes also combine them with other types of sources. But what at least some scholars claim, and we probably agree here, that the methodological debate and reflection kind of is lagging somehow behind us jumping on the bandwagon of using these kind of technologies. And when looking kind of at the history of protest event analysis, but potentially also social movement scholarship more broadly, we had it also this morning in the first intervention by Donatella, we're very much interested in the substance. We want to understand kind of these protests, we want to understand social movements, that is often natural, that kind of we're rather interested than in getting the data in the first place and not reflecting in the first place about how to do that. But of course, that would, if you look at the history of protest event analyses, kind of be a roll backwards in time, where also the initiators of these endeavors in the 60s, 70s were, of course, very enthusiastic about the movement, and the words of bias and categories, indicators were not that strongly out there, and for sure we shouldn't repeat that, and there is a lot of research out there to also learn about that. So these are the three reasons why at least we four are kind of here tonight. And now I would hand over to Donatella, who will introduce a bit more. When we started thinking about this, what kind of challenges and opportunities did we actually see in this endeavor of bringing digital sources to protest event analyses? And then we have two first interventions by our esteemed speakers, by Jen and then by Yannis, and then we see how it goes. If there is a lot of controversy, then potentially Donatella and also myself will kind of go back on them, and we'll see how we kind of can solve them or not. And then, of course, we have a room full of great minds that then hopefully also want to intervene in the debate with questions, comments, and so on. So thanks a lot again to all of you for being here. And Donatella, the word is yours.
Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you very much to Sven and our other people who work with us at VZB at Cosmos. As Sven said, these ideas came very much bottom-up. So we were using protest event analysis, but we were also aware of the limitations and wanted to develop it, especially in the directions of using innovative methods to combine the quantitative and the qualitative type of dimensions. And in work that I had done in recent time on Black Lives Matter, on the anti-vax, but also a paper I wrote with a colleague on Lebanon, what I noticed was that when you were looking for materials on protest event analysis, you found a lot of videos, and that these videos were very telling about some dimensions that were missing in the analysis of protest event. Plus that for nowadays, organizations by the activists, but also for the ways in which the public looks at events, the visuals are more and more important. We are not only in the digital age, as in the title of the conference, but also in an age in which text is losing meaning vis-à-vis the presence of images. This is something that activists know, and so I think that there is more and more of reflections on how visual images, videos, and so on can produce an effect on the public, and this is particularly true for some types of events. So we discussed also in the morning people studying protest events in authoritarian regimes know that very often you cannot go in large numbers in the street, but you have to show something that visually can capture the attentions. Young generations are said to be to grow up to having been socialized to much more the use of images than the use of text. And these visuals, we immediately saw that were available to help us to distinguish very different types of performances that protest event analysis sometimes tend to locate within the same box, the same categories. So, for instance, during the pandemic moment, both Black Lives Matter activists and anti-vax activists used a lot of sit-in. But the type of choreography of the sit-ins tend to be very different. So what we saw was that there were materials available that were useful, that were more and more important also strategically for the actors that used them, and so that we needed to construct instruments. As I mentioned in the morning, social movement studies, I think, is a quite pragmatic field in terms of the use of methodology. So pluralistic also because it's oriented towards addressing the specific challenge of lack of data and trying to fill in gaps that in other fields are less evident. So with this type of perspective and also relying upon trust and experiences of collaborations, with Sven we started to think about how we could use these materials in order to improve social movement studies in terms of methods in two directions. One is the directions of quantitative protest event analysis, so what you could add through videos, and the other one is the directions of ethnographic studies. So someone, I think it was Manes, who asked this morning, what do you gain when you use digital rather than direct observations on site. And we elaborated on these issues. What do we gain? So more type of informations for the protest event analysis and the possibilities to look at events that are not reachable for us because they are risky in authoritarian regimes, not possible to travel, but also because they are more and more events that happen in the past. So the type of use of the video allows for expanding a lot the potential for studying. What do you do when you start to realize that some types of data are important? Is you start to read, and so we were looking for suggestions by friends who had started similar enterprises about which type of methodological reflections were already available, and we relied a lot also upon this type of research, but also what we noticed was that this work were inspiring, but that they were scattered, so that they were oriented towards different research questions and that had developed within different fields and needed a sort of arena in which we could be, I can say, presented in constructive ways. Sven said this morning this conference was also a bit a way to sell these new ideas, but I think in a critical way. So we are not cynical sellers, but what we discovered also with the help of Sophia and Anna was that using this type of data presents a lot of challenges as well. Some of these we think we have found a way to address. In other cases, we thought we want to learn also from the experience of our scholars in different disciplines working on the field. So what I want to present here is just some of these dilemmas and ways in which we address challenges in the different steps of a research design. So when using what we called and want to sell as video-based protest event analysis, which type of concerns we have in the different steps of our work. And the first one is, of course, the type of problems or issues that we find are particularly well served by the use of this type of techniques. And as I mentioned, the fact that protesters themselves use more and more visuals is an incentive to use this type of technique as well. But also we found for movements that are less well known, like the anti-vax protest, or for movements that are less easy to reach, because of physical distance or also because of other forms of cultural distances and so on, addressed using video-enhanced protest event analysis could be particularly relevant, but also it could be particularly relevant vis-à-vis sometimes of theoretical questions. And what we saw is that videos and video-enhanced protest event analysis are particularly useful in defining the script, analyzing the script of a protest event. So by script, we mean on the one hand the sort of choreography performances within an event, but on the other hand also the meaning making by the performer through the use of text, images, slogans, and speeches that are often also part of the protest. The emotional atmosphere that usually journalists have more difficulties in reporting upon because the information that we code through protest event analysis is very short. But also what we found very useful in terms of theoretical problem is all the analysis of the situational dynamics that are possible to reconstruct through the use of video-enhanced protest event analysis. And so the interactional dynamics within the protest scene as an arena in which different actors participate, not only the protesters, but the bystanders, counter-demonstrators, the police, and all the journalists themselves, or the different actors that may intervene in this. In the type of research questions, also what is important is something that Yanis mentioned this morning. Video-enhanced protest event analysis through its qualitative attentions allows also to look more in details at eventful protests. So to look also at what makes them eventful from the point of view of the emotional atmosphere, the symbolic meaning, and so on. So situational dynamics, meaning making, symbols, and emotions are, I think, elements that could be captured quite well with video-enhanced type of protest event analysis. But we found also challenge, and so the article that we wrote was also sort of based on our reflections on our own process of research. So the first question was, how do we select cases? And we developed different type of reflections for different type of strategies. One could try to get in a sort of intensive way a lot of information on a few events, even just one event. Stefan Maltaner, who unfortunately could not be here, has focused attentions and researched one important event in Hamburg in which he wanted to reconstruct these situational dynamics. Another way, on the opposite way, is to collect information in an attempt to fill in gaps that the protest event analysis leave unanswered, and to use them in more extensive forms. All intermediate type of strategies could be chosen between these, and we tried to single out the specific opportunities and challenges of each of these type of strategies. We discovered that analyzing videos is neither can I say, time-saving. To the contrary, it is quite time-consuming exercise and could be emotionally also very stressing. We adopted the strategies that was oriented towards singling out the type of, representative events of each wave of protest. And so we had 4 events for each country. Still 4 events, I think they gave us a lot, but they required also a lot of investment. We discovered also that in the collections of data, you have to make choices that are paralleled to the ones that you make in other methods about which type of sources you want to use. And there, the length of the reports, the origins, so the reliability of the report, and their capacity to give a dense pictures are very useful, and very useful also vis-à-vis the normal forms of participant observations is also the possibility to go repeatedly in rereading, re-watching the videos in order to find evidences about questions you are asking for. And what we found also relevant was the reflections that also other scholars have done about the ethical concerns on all that you have to keep in mind about the use of the materials, the type of characteristics of the videos that are more useful for the researchers. So we thought that it was useful to use this type of methods for especially some types of event, physically less accessible, events that happen in the past, events that are risky to watch directly, but also that the methods allows to collect more information on more events. And that the more events you wanted to analyze, the more you needed to find the standardized techniques. So also a product of our collaborations is the development of, well, not really a totally structured codebook as the one you use for the normal protest event analysis, but still we in part deductively and in part inductively trying to map the type of informations that are available and useful in this type of enterprise. Well, how standardized? How inductive versus deductive the analysis, how much to focus on sequences and turning point is a questions that we would like to discuss. So in the selling of the method and in the selling of the conference to a certain extent, I think we need to be cautious, but at the same time that I think we cannot leave such a rich source as unattended, that we have to exploit it, but with a sort of awareness about the challenges and the opportunities that the different strategies bring about. And I think this is what we want to do in the conference and also tonight. So I would stop here.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Donatella. I think that's exactly what we wanted, that also to kind of ask some old questions anew and maybe also steer kind of up a conversation between quite different fields and people in the field. That's why I wouldn't say they're very opposing, but Yanis also has a bit the head of an ethnographer because we missed that one now on the panel. But I would now first turn to Jennifer, and maybe if you could share with us your kind of insights and how you see this endeavor of really bringing video analyses to protest event.
Sure. Well, first, let me thank you, Sven, for your hospitality and for having me as a visitor at the center, and to both you and Donatella for organizing, and to Katja, wherever she is, for all the background work that she's done, which is so important, and to the rest of the folks who have welcomed me over the last 2 weeks here at the center. And also, let me start with a congratulations, which is that I think the conference idea is very important and forward-looking, as is the paper. The goal of really helping protest event analysis mature even further and take a next step is something that I think as a field we can invest in heavily. And so it was exciting to read the work, to be here and read other people's way of approaching this. And I think that figuring out how to help protest event analysis by helping it to really change in relationship to the information environment that it's in is a laudable goal. So I'll sort of start off with some ways in which I think maybe you could sell this even further. And then I'll talk more about some of the concerns one may have, which I agree with you are not reasons to not do something. They're reasons to be thoughtful and careful about how you do it. In terms of elaborating more, if you read the paper makes this distinction between a sort of extractive use and a reconstructive use of video protest event analysis. And I think on the extractive front, one place that is even underplayed in the paper is the ability to fill in sort of critical kinds of missing information. So in the United States, it's very common to have reporting, even if it's kind of minor, about whether or not police were present or absent at a protest event. So a report might just say something like, police took no action. But in the saying of that, because the United States media is so focused on authorities' reaction to protest, even in the saying of that, you know something about police were present, but they didn't do anything, or police made no arrests, you know they were present, but they didn't make any arrests. My understanding from conversations over the last week and a half is that one of the reasons why fewer European protest event data sets have policing variables that sort of match the kinds of variables that we have in the United States in our sets is because the media focus is maybe less so on police action and presence, and so you just don't get very good reporting on that. Well, this is a place, like, if you think about what are the sort of weaknesses in reporting, and then how can video in particular help to deal with the kinds of weaknesses that exist in the kinds of reporting we've drawn on for protest event analysis, I think that that could be quite important. Like it could even the score on your ability to collect data on police presence and action at protest events. Both actually, I think this is something that would help in almost any protest event analysis, which is, I think there's a real risk that reporters underestimate or underreport the number of organizations that are involved or the number of different kinds of groups that are involved. And so I've worked extensively with some of the organizational data in US protest event data sets, and you really get a sense that you know that there are organizations that are missing, that aren't reported. There's not much you can do about it. You know that there was a lot of selectivity in how the reporter chose between, if a reporter says these 4 organizations were there and then also 20 others, what are those 20 others that are lost? They're really important in our analysis, but they weren't important to the reporter. And I think if you're thinking on that extractive front, it's not that just more data makes it better. It's that it's filling in or has the promise of filling in particular kinds of data that were very corrosive to our analyses. Like not knowing what authorities are doing in reaction to protest is really a critical absence. Thinking that organizations are important or debatably important and then not being able to actually know that your organizational data is fairly complete is very consequential. And I think also the ability to better identify the participants who are actually actually at protest events in terms of more intersectional identities of participants is really valuable. We often get a very thin point of view of who was present at protest events, and as someone who studies also young people, and young people have full identities, there are young Black women, there are young Italian men, there are fuller identities that are not getting represented in media reporting, but that may be able to be extracted. And so I think where perhaps this is being undersold a bit on the extractive front is there's almost a sense where it's, oh, just more data. But no, if you can pinpoint the kinds of data that have been really regrettably uneven, or we know are problematically scarce, this actually poses a lot of promise. I think in terms of bringing the extractive and reconstructive fronts together, I think that there's a really exciting ability to bring protest event analysis to people who have never thought about using it before, because they're not interested in counting events or modeling relationships. They're interested in symbolic analyses and culture. And the ability for this method to expand itself to be able to be amenable to a fundamentally broader set of questions than it's been able to access before is, again, not just more questions, right? It opens up things to an entirely different way of understanding what protest is, how people see it, its meaning in the world. And so I would say that in both of these ways, I think the paper almost presents the extractive and the reconstructive fronts as incremental increases. But I would say that if you can deliver on the promise of this, they can be transformative increases, because they're not just more, they are more in important ways that change the field. I also think that there are a few other advantages that the paper doesn't talk about, and so I'll help you sell a bit more. One is that I think now the source of the video can itself become a variable. And that is in some ways a technical issue. Like, you probably are going to need to model things about the provenance and the quality of the source of the video. Certainly, you're going to have to figure out ways to differentially weight and investigate outliers where you might wonder about their information as a source. But at another level, tracking the sources of videos itself can become a way to document who seeks to record and share performances of protest. Because we have this very... We've been able to ignore that because we just say it's the media, right? But there's a lot of different kinds of actors who have very different motivations for recording and sharing. And all of a sudden, we can turn our social science camera, so to speak, on them to try to understand who is interested in consuming, who's interested in producing information about this. I also think that figuring out how to build some sort of pipeline for this, particularly to the extent, and we've saw many varied but interesting approaches to this across the day already, for machine-assisted coding of images, that really has the ability to sort of transform real-time things. Like in the United States, we have this crowd counting consortium data that is drawing heavily on internet-based materials that oftentimes have images or videos, and the ability to put that into a pipeline with this expanded information is now Sven will be happy because I've left myself very little time, and it's now the point where I reach the concerns. So I think as we engage this, it's responsible and indeed will help the method in the long run to think about how to deal with a couple altered concerns. So I think we will have new kinds of selection bias to worry about. So the selection of videos and particularly the risk of removal of videos. And Sabine's paper earlier talked about this as an issue. But it's not a random a set of things or a full reporting of things that are on the web and that are available still at a certain time later. And so we're really going to have to restyle our thinking about and empirically approach what kinds of protest events have videos and different volumes of videos. I think we're also going to have to think a bit more than the paper wants to admit at first pass about description bias. Because in some ways, the paper treats description bias as if there's this objective world, and now that we can video it, we can resolve what actually happened at events. But I can tell you, being from the United States right now, that just having the same information does not mean that everyone agrees on what is happening in that situation. And indeed, I think it's quite possible that this is not just affects the sort of reconstructive use of these methods, but in some ways can affect the extractive use of these methods, because just having a video doesn't actually settle what you're viewing in some fundamental ways, depending on what the question is. I think we also have to think about what some new biases are, like is there an editing bias that we now have to consider? Because these are, sure, there were editors before, but they had professional norms, we understood those, we could track transitions in editors, in papers, et cetera, but now we have to think about these kinds of things. We also have to think about provenance and fabrication. So professional journalism has given us the ease that their job is to not get it fundamentally wrong most of the time. They do get it wrong occasionally, but they're supposed to get it right almost always. But people do fabricate things online. They do either whole cloth now through AI deepfakes or through the editing of things. And I think that whether you're talking about governments or us as students of protest, we're not really ready to understand what fabricated visuals will do to our ability to understand the world, and how those are still going to actually have to be part of our analyses, because they're going to have an impact on the world as they're consumed, but we're going to have to be able to disentangle that. The last thing I will say, since I'm running a bit out of time, is really about the how to do this within a world where video surveillance is increasingly prominent and concerning. Depending on the quality and the resolution of the video, ultimately, it may be quite difficult to de-identify from the perspective of AI face and gait recognition. I mean, you don't even have to see somebody's face in a video. There are tools that can track how someone walks, and it turns out that's a pretty identifying characteristic. Here, I would reference a colleague of yours in Berlin, Anita Goetz, who's done some work on how to think about in the future, like not just how do you make a method safe for now, but how do you think about making a method safe in the future? Because ultimately, we don't really want to be in a situation where we are helping governments figure out how to target protest. And so, like, I very much loved the paper earlier today, Improving Computer Vision. But if we're figuring out how to disarticulate images and focus on them, we have to be careful about how much we're delivering a toolkit to others as much as we are to ourselves. The last thing I will say is there are some potentials, though, here to flip that surveillance, which is to the extent that we can get access to government archives of videos, we have a rare chance to actually have protesters reap real rewards from their own surveillance, because it would both allow us to know from the point of view of the state what kind of vision of protest they have, but also to treat that as a useful source of data as opposed to just a source of surveillance and repression.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now I have these different hats on because we have a sequence here, so we can't we said we don't intervene right now, but we would also give Yannis a chance to maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Sven. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me here on the panel. Usually it's the other way around, and both you and Donatella and also Sophia have shared their generous comments on my work in the past, so I'm very happy and honored to return the favor. Some of it ties in quite neatly with what Jennifer just mentioned, and I will start with the opportunities and pitfalls that you outlined in your paper. And I would go to say that some of the pitfalls that you outlined might actually read more to me like promises, to be frank. So and this relates especially to the focus on primary products, video products, communication products that you mentioned. And you write there, the price to pay is analyzing materials that are not collected firsthand and therefore are less accurate, even biased by the interests and strategies of those filming and posting. And I actually believe you could turn this argument on its head in the first place and argue that focusing on the agents of change, and I've made a similar argument this morning, I think, focus on the agents of change themselves and the way they capture social reality is an extremely productive step moving forward from relying on secondary and second-hand reconstructions of reality. And rather than discounting or discarding the partiality of these videos as unreliable, for reconstructing the dynamics of contentions, I believe we should recognize the chance of having these viewpoints expressed in the videos, in essence, the frame of the video. So the content, what is filmed, what is uploaded, and what is also not filmed and not uploaded, and reflecting on that as a window into how contenders themselves think of their struggle, or at least how they want this struggle to be seen by the outside world. There's a reason why we post some videos and not others, why we post some pictures on Facebook, not others. Of course, it's an inscenation, but this inscenation, I think, tells us a lot about the more subtle claims that underlie protest movements. In other words, I think material that is distorted or biased can be analyzed precisely because of its inaccuracies, in omissions, and these hyperbolic representation that you have when you upload pictures of protesters facing tanks or throwing a stone at police or facing police cordons and defying authorities. But to go beyond like just lauding this project, which I very much enjoyed reading how it stands, I want to take the occasion to offer some additional ideas that maybe you could incorporate or reflect also on in the draft. And I'll start with some more abstract and conceptual, and then move to some empirical, and then end on an ethical note. So first, I think there is at least a potential or an argument to be made that next to the extractive and reconstructive, I would like to invite you to think of a potential additional and more like a constitutive function of video for PEA. And this refers to the option to not only use video in a supplementary way, so not only to fall back into the old ways and just supplement what we can't get from that and supplement it with the information coded from the videos, but essentially have video as a backbone, as a running source for the entire PEA in the first place, and supplement this information with textual data, so to flip it on its head. And the reason I'm arguing for that is because in highly controlled public settings, especially in authoritarian contexts like some of those that I've studied, but also in places where the public reporting is just heavily skewed against reporting on some sorts of protest, we currently see that even in Germany. Sometimes the segmented realities and segmented counterpublics that you find within specific online platforms serve as much richer sources of data and of identifying events than even mainstream media can ever capture. So that means that in some cases at least, probably not in all, but protest videos or live streams can, I think, offer even more complete pictures of entire protest episodes, both in terms of quantity, that is the coverage ratio, but also in terms of quality, in terms of level of detail, than the totality of other reports that you find in other news, including online. To give you an example, in my own research on the mobilization of the Muslim Brotherhood after the military coup in Egypt, the websites of the Brotherhood and social media platforms and its Freedom and Justice Party were indispensable for reconstructing their mobilization, because they took notice of small and peaceful demonstrations also and were less affected by censorship. But, and it was not mainly the text published in these sources that was so important. What was particularly crucial is that the articles were always linked, or mostly linked, to videos on citizen-reported platforms. So you wouldn't have often a description of the protest event itself, but you would just have a list of videos of this event, such as Bambuser, Ustream, Livestream, etc., where these demonstrators then uploaded live feeds and cell phones videos. And this turned them into really valuable resources because on the one hand, you had this geotagging function of this platform, recording date and location that bolster data reliability. But on the other hand, it turns out that also having these videos included actually lowered the reporting bias of the textual description. And the only way I've made sense of this so far is that because anyone reading a report can directly click on the link in the video, so those writing the reports, they will be very careful of what they state about a protest event and thus have a much more accurate representation. So you'd find actually these videos on highly partisan platforms of protest organizers themselves having much more accurate reporting about their events than any other source that I found. You can, of course, argue, and that's, I think, a valid argument, that not every protest has a video recording, right? That's true. But not every protest gets a newspaper article either, right? And more importantly, one can also reasonably argue, I think, that activities that don't make it into the rather protest-sensitive video reporting by citizen reporters, who are actually interested in promoting their cause, they are probably also the ones that can be considered to only have played a marginal role. Yeah, because they were limited in their visibility and thus also somehow limited into potentially affecting broader arguments. And I think this is essentially what Gamson and Wolfsfeld have argued early in the past when they labeled non-events basically all those that didn't receive any media coverage. And I think you can make a similar argument for video reporting as well. And from that angle, again, an analysis based on a selective pool of video sources of partisan origin, they cannot only be just a pragmatic choice because you don't have anything better, but a theoretically grounded imperative. So secondly, moving to the empirical suggestions. So I've been inspired quite a bit by the work of my colleague Miriam at the Interact. And I think thus far, PEA has dealt with spatial angles and spatiality rather in a reductive way, and the method that you're proposing, I think, has quite a bit of potential that can be expanded upon. You touch upon it in the paper, but I'd like you to push you on this a little bit, because so far, I mean, in the classic PEA, of course, we have administrative units like districts, cities, and so on. We often have like start and end points or some landmarks, and of course, from the videos, you can reconstruct geographic spatiality more precisely, like where marches passed, where they were confronted, etc., when did violence erupt, at which places. But also, and I think this is really important, you can also capture the subjective nature of space. So just think of protesters marching by a memorial and stopping there and pausing for a while, lowering their voices, laying down roses or something like that. These affective markers, I think, are sometimes much more revealing of the meaning of space during events than abstract claims, chants, or posters, who are usually designed before a protest or rehearsed before a protest, like chants and so on. And that's more conform much more to routines and familiar patterns of interacting than that what happens actually in the spaces where people then stand and protest. In a similar way, but I'm not going to get too much into detail because this is already expanded upon in paper. I think the methodology also holds great promise for research on artifacts and symbols and objects, and we talked about this a bit earlier. But I think it offers the potential to compare these different symbolisms and artifacts across protests. So in the Egyptian case, you had, after the military coup, for instance, protesters raising these 4 fingers for Rabah as a symbol of resistance, whereas you had coup protesters, pro-regime protesters raising a victory symbol, and you could, like, basically discerning from the videos, just these hand gestures would immediately show you who was on which side, basically, from any video reporting that you found. But also within protests themselves, so not only across. So think of marches of like Fridays for Future, so on, where you have different blocks, yeah, and different blocks with different segments and different habitus, depending on the marching order, which can tell you a lot about the composition also of the hierarchies within one protest event. And I think that's a way of circumventing this category of who's the main organizer in a way, because it allows us to hierarchize a bit of who takes part. Finally, I want to end on a note that I'm really happy that you touched upon in this paper, which is basically the ethics and security practice of working with each images. I was going to mention something similar that you have, but I couldn't put it in the same eloquent words, so I will just focus on the other side of the coin. So one is, of course, the first side is that what can be happening with these databases that we construct. And I think what Sabine this morning told us about how event data already creates sort of a historical archive of these events. This is great, yeah, but it's also super dangerous because we don't know where stuff develops to, and especially there's a high conflict between transparency and reliability of these sources and the security of those that we report about. There is right now, if you look at video protests of the aftermath of the military coup in Egypt, I think the YouTube videos that are online, were online at the time, probably only 5 to 10% of them are still online, and you can say, well, that's a shame for research. Actually, it's pretty great for those who took part in those events, yeah? So if we catalog them, we match them, we upload them to some publicly verifiable, accessible database, for instance, these videos will be there and they will be kept and they will become an archive also for ages of repression. And similar in ways that also Jennifer has mentioned. However, one other aspect that I just want to touch upon again, which you already mentioned in the paper, and I really think it's crucial, is this consequence of coming in contact with high amounts of graphic footage. Yeah? So while this is potential, evidence for investigative purpose, I think we should also be quite mindful about the effects that traumatizing imagery can have on those that come into contact with it on a regular basis. And I think all the reports that you had about those content moderators for Facebook who are farmed here in the Siemensstadt or so, they tell you quite a bit of what can happen to coders in large ERC grant projects or so on. If they work especially on contentious topics in violent settings. And I think these risks are twofold. So on the one hand, you have a methodological risk because the reception of these highly graphic contents, they can introduce a serious bias into research, a methodological bias. So from coding to more in-depth interpretation, can actually induce a sort of rage coding as well, where you kind of overstage bias, or coding for redemption, if you will. So there's a methodological risk, but also significantly, that's what you touch upon, thankfully, this exposure to graphic media, they can also induce significant mental distress. Of course, you also have that when you work with textual data, right? You cannot unread some stuff, but it's a different thing. If you have images, they have a particular stickiness, and there's a reason why we say that image stays with me, yeah? And that I cannot get it out of my head. They cannot be unseen, simply. And from especially content, and this is something that I want to highlight as an aspect. I think if we work with content from open source material and primary protest organizers, this content can be much more graphic in nature than journalist accounts of the very same event. Why? Because often these videos are precisely taken to bear witness to injustice, and thus, on the one hand, much less sanitized than media reporting and media images, where journalists and editors are often cautious about the level of gore that they want to inflict, they want to show their audience. And there's, again, also a cultural gap here, right? So in Germany, the videos that you have coming out of Palestine, they are extremely more, let's say, clean, than the videos that you would find in Al Jazeera or even in the US and CNN. Yeah? But also, there is a reason why people take these images, and often they are kind of incentivized to catalog and videograph precisely the most brutal instances because they want to attract attention to their clone. So there might be even an overexposure to violence in comparison to other events. Yeah? The good news, don't want to end on such a bad note, but I think the good news is that here, particularly open source intelligence and open source communities like Bellingcat and so on, they have developed countless toolkits to deal with these problems, to minimize this harm from videos in a way, from analyzing videos in thumbnail, to watching videos frame per frame, to turning into black and white, watching without sound. But, and I think this is where I want to end, is like, none of this is a silver bullet, because different people react differently for videos. For some, sound, the sound of crying children might be particularly traumatic or re-traumatizing. For others, it's explicit physical injuries. Just think of how a friend of you who's a doctor reacts completely different to physical injury as you, and vice versa regarding other topics. But I believe it's really important to think about this aspect when dealing with the visual data, and to reflect sort of on mental hygiene, when introducing such a methodology, because the way I see it, at least, it has a lot of promise to take off, and we should not start thinking about this ex post in a couple of years to pass. So thanks a lot. These are my comments. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe we give a round of applause first. commentators. And as said, I have really a difficult job because on the one hand, I was thinking kind of what should I now respond to? At the same time, I was thinking how should we actually do this all in a research project? But I think it shows, of course, the kind of advantages out there in kind of at least going there also in terms of methodological reflections. And I think like Donatella started from kind of the questions that we could potentially ask to kind of the research process, but then also to all of these ethical questions that you ended now. I think I would still leave it for a second here on the podium, and then we kind of are ready for your comments and perspectives, because of course I also very much like Jennifer's kind of comment that maybe it also makes other people enthusiastic about protest event analyses that have not yet thought about systematic catalogs before. Maybe I let Donatella respond afterwards, but I just have maybe one kind of set of questions to you, because you very much stressed now also the extractive function of kind of video material, that we could really enrich kind of our catalogs as we have them. Because as I understand, the big advantage, of course, of protest event analyses is exactly that systematic variation and kind of information that we have over time or across countries or across issues. That's kind of the beauty of it. And of course, then bringing all of this additional information in to that pipeline, I'm just wondering how you would do that if you really had the larger ambition, for example, of mapping the last decade of US protest politics and its kind of relation to party politics. But how would you do that kind of with the plethora of material out there also, with all the issues of deplatforming what you had before? So I'm giving you the ball a bit kind of back, because I see kind of that we can have there more and different kinds of data that is not just filling in missing values, but how to do that systematically that we don't lose the beauty of such protest catalogs in the first place. So maybe that's for Jennifer, and then maybe Donatella has another kind of question response to Yannis.
So I think this is why I was mentioning it in relationship to like crowd counting consortium, where you have the sort of quote unquote real-time production of event data, because the extent to which you can be gathering the videos as proximate to the occurrence, you limit the loss, right? And so I think there are going to be use cases where, I mean, when I was reading the paper, I was trying to not frame this as, for myself, is this good or bad, or under what conditions is this most useful, under what conditions is this most problematic. And I think the conditions under which you can really use that extractive function to augment traditional protest event analysis in a very powerful way is on those sort of forward-looking things like crowd counting consortium or some equivalent, where in another nation where you're trying to right now do this catalog in an ongoing kind of way. I think for historical stuff, it gets much more difficult. And there you're going to end up with more media-focused sources, although even there that might enrich, you might find that you could fill in particular kinds of variables in a way that have been problematic before. But I think particularly for, and this is what's exciting about thinking about this as you're starting to launch a new area, as opposed to in the way that it's done before, where people launch and then they look back and see, oh, what could have been different. This gives you a chance to use those answers of where is this most likely to be effective, where is this going to have the most problems, as a way of making future decisions as opposed to evaluating past ones.
Yeah. Connecting the comments, which I found extremely useful to sell better, but also to reflect about what we are selling. I saw two elements which I think are converging in your also suggestions about how to improve. And one element is what Jen I think meant when she said making the source a variable, and in your language it was using the bias rather than avoiding it. And it is in fact something that's probably in protest event analysis in the traditional way, one of the weaknesses for some times has been the fact that there was no concern with the analysis of the journalistic strategies. While I think that in this case, what you both suggest is to look at the strategies of the different actors. And this is also something which emerged in the morning when we said comparing videos with different sources. And so I think this is very important and something that we can reflect upon as an improvement on both type of qualitative and qualitative methods that we want to speak to. But also there is something that both of you have stressed, and it is repression. And I think that we titled this conference reflecting on protest in a digital age, but it is also true that this is a repressive age. So that it is an age in which many types of protests have been repressed very heavily, not only in the authoritarian regimes, but also in democracies, and that part of the repressive element has been eliminating images, so not letting the actor speak. And I think this is also gives even more importance to the type of analysis that the methods that we suggest, but also pushes us toward thinking about how to deal with this element of repressions from the different point of view. The questions that I still have open is about what to do with the images, in the sense that I have the impressions that most of us are, as someone noted, much more trained to analyze text than to analyze the subtle meaning of the images. And here I can think different ways to approach the problem. One would be to have more interdisciplinary work, also with scholars that are more trained in this type of analysis. But another one is also to add a dimensions of in-depth interviews with the producers of the video. So trying to see what the strategies is that they use, because the video for us in both strategies, extractive and reconstructing, is a source. But it is also a strategic product. It is also a performance. It is also a protest event. And so on this, I wanted to also ask Yannis something more about the use that we can make of the video in our analysis, and the use that you have done.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts. I don't have obviously I don't have an answer to that will satisfy you, but I see more challenges with the second of the suggestions that you mentioned with this interviewing, and the reason for that is twofold. So on the one hand, same as with media sources, there's been these attempts to control for reporting bias by, in a way, taking selective samples and assuming some sort of stability of bias over time, and either kind of trying to balance it in the analysis qualitatively, or to try to include it in the calculations. But when you have videos of protest events that are so decentralized and so scattered place, I don't think you can make a reasonable argument that interviews with some video producers have any representativity, and about their intentions of posting these videos online, etc., have any representativity for all of the video producers that are there, because again, I think the reasons for why people post these videos are quite diverse. So I think we should rather see them as symptomatic, and I think that also gets you into these debates that you had in literary studies about the intention of author versus the reception of an image, which I think is it's hard to get out in video production. I do think that this is less the case when you have videos, of course, that are uploaded by reporters who have some sort of media identity and so on. And I think, again, I wouldn't set I don't know how to identify a certain threshold, what makes you a citizen reporter, but I'm sure people have worked on this. But I just thinking about the current reporting from Raza, where you have people who have been citizen reporters and working in that function for decades, and they have built a media personality for certain content types that they produce, which I think gives you a way to balance their reporting on one episode. But the question would be, for me, are vid interviews the best way to check for that, or would it rather be going to what you have worked on contentious event analysis, rather comparing the way how these producers put out content and footage in one event episode as compared to others, and so on, whether there's a pattern, and see if there's a pattern or not. However, I think that is, again, an additional layer of labor that will be extremely time and resource intensive, right, to do so. I think in terms of video reporting, what we can do with these images and how we can analyze them, I appreciate that the comment by Jennifer that this is rather, I mean, you're rather opening a box than trying to close it. So I don't think that there's any methodology where you will able to kind of incorporate all of these in a database, right? I mean, that would mean incorporating entire disciplines, social sciences and cultural science within a database and trying to quantify it. I see rather the potential of moving and setting the emphasis on different aspects of it. So be it on composition of players and alliance buildings within arenas and their interaction, be it on symbolism and their effective nature, be it on spatiality, the visuality of images within protests. So that's also an additional layer that you have not reflected too much on it, but I think it's also interesting to think about. Of course, we have moving images, but these moving images show still images. So what does that tell us? What are we actually analyzing? Where's the end is the frame, and so we're actually accessing a double reconstructed reality when we, for instance, analyze protest posters through these images, because it's not the same image that would be posted on a website, for instance. Mm-hmm. But I think for me right now, I rather think that the productive side of these papers, that it opens up these questions, and it will probably spawn quite a few articles coming out of that in terms of methodological reflections, rather than it could ever encapsulate and check for all of these aspects right now as it stands.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment. I mean, that also pops up in my mind. No, also, I mean, you now setting up an Italian protest event monitoring system. We're doing the same for Germany and other colleagues in the room here as well. It's probably rather making also this infrastructure then more kind of accessible and multi-use kind of, and not so much thinking about what we used it traditionally for and how we kind of think it's a done database. But as you also said, kind of with the crowd counting consortium, rather as a kind of a hub for other material to be added and then kind of also then taken as a field, and not so much as an individual researcher or even a bigger research project. So that, of course, is also a bridge maybe to you as kind of the crowd out there. What kind of thoughts, as scattered as they might be, came to your minds, kind of listening to us, doing your own research and so on. And of course, we're happy to receive also comments on how you reflect on these various topics. I can already see some hands here, and then I will also look at Endre, okay, because we also have some online crowd. But maybe, Sebastian, if you want to go first.
So I think this is really, well, maybe, this is really fascinating to think about including video material. And of course, I mean, the communication about protest has changed a lot since these smartphone videos are available. The question is, okay, so as researchers, what can we actually do with it? And is that more qualitative material to look in more detail into specific events, or could it really be something for a protest event analysis like stuff? And the question why I ask this is, okay, what is this video doing? Is it actually giving us information at a similar level of abstraction as the text does. And I mean, if we look at the PEA data sets, and if we look at studies that use PEA data sets, we already see that only few variables that are coded in the PEA data sets are actually used in our scientific work. So if the video material is now much deeper and much more detailed, how will we be able to use it? Maybe that's, but that's just only one aspect, but more importantly, how will we be able to to get the data? So, and of course, I think then the data is so much more complex that already now the PEA, that the text-based PEA, is so labor-intensive that it really only makes sense to move to computational models if we want to have a broader perspective. But then we need the computational models to also deal with the videos, because you cannot have people watching hours and hours and days and years of video material. And then what do we get out of the models? On which level? So how much detail of information do we then get out of that potentially? That we can use. And then the question is, okay, so do we then still have enough of this richness of the original material available when we go to videos in protest event analysis?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would suggest, because I saw some more hands, that we maybe collect already 2 interventions, and then Manuela, I think, was another one, and Hans-Jörg, I also have you on my list. Yes.
Thank you. So thank you a lot. First of all, I would like to thank you. So the point is, I'm very happy that you are selling this method before having established everything on that. I mean, I think this operation, this idea is very fruitful, and this kind of roundtable and workshop behind is exactly what one would like to have. So an arena where to exchange ideas and also problems and opportunities. So said that. I pick up two points which have been raised by one Donatella Della Porta and one by Jennifer Earle to raise some reflections around. No? So I don't have answers, and this is not criticism, it's just a point for a common reflection. One is about what images can add to us and to the traditional protest event analysis, if we want. And Donatella said correctly, no, they can also, videos and images can also give us information about the past, but also about culturally distant protest. This is true, actually, but at the same time, this poses the problem of the polysemy of images. So images are polysemic by nature, and this means that the coder, no, let me say the coder, the analyst, no, which are going to analyze them, let's say they have to deal even more than when we do traditional protest event analysis with the culturally embedded symbols, iconography, and so this poses some problem, no? And the second point is about the, let me call it validity of data, but something that I'm reframing this, but something that Jennifer, in my view, did raise. In traditional protest event analysis, we were aware of the biases of the news coverage. You know? For instance, decades of protest event analysis did teach us that usually civil society is less covered, no, than institutional actors, no? And also violent protests are more covered usually than moderated or symbolic or expressive, and so on and so forth. And here, with this new method, we don't know what are or at least they are not yet systematized, all the possible biases. And this is also complexified by the fact that also the protesters become producers of videos. So here I think that the real 2 points that Donatella raised become really crucial. One is about the sources, so where does the image come from? Because, for instance, different images can also mobilize or demobilize. If I represent a protest with big sides, non-violent protest repertoire, and a certain type of components, this will have also some effect recipient. So the point is, what kind of images we are looking to investigate. So the point about sources, I think it's a point where methodologically and we, if we want, we should have to reflect more deeply. And also, finally, the point of the selection. So sources and selection. What are the sources from where we select images? What are the criteria? Some of the criteria has been proposed by Donatella, but I still hear, let's say I still see some possible room for reflections and systematization. And the final point, something that has been addressed briefly by Yannis, is about also some sort of repository, partly by both of you. Images are also big in size, and therefore if we want to start to store them, probably not only for the retrieve them, but also store them, we have also to think about technicalities, no? Probably even more than we thought with the traditional protest event data. Thank you.
Who wants to respond? I mean, I can also respond maybe to the first point, and then you can because I completely can very well relate to what you said, Sebastian. That's exactly what kind of triggered me to ask kind of Jennifer, but how to incorporate that then in systematic kind of protest event analyses as we used to have it. I mean, what we did now in this kind of first kind of pre-test of this for COVID was that we used in the first step kind of protest event analysis to then give us kind of some hint of when we should really look more closely at kind of these changing scripts, no? So that we rather use the protest event as some sort of sampling frame and then go more kind of in-depth there. But of course, I can think about other questions, like you said it about the organizations, where probably also not for all of these events that we have in a catalog, it's as important to know kind of the organizations behind, where we also have no indications of who should it be, or it's just kind of one or two that are mentioned. But for the big rallies in a city like Berlin, for sure it would be good then to look for those bigger rallies, who is actually the alliance kind of behind that, and then go there maybe to these additional kind of sources and use videos maybe first in a really simple extractive function, just getting at the text and the images, what are the posters, what are kind of the colors that we see, and so on. That would be maybe the way I would first kind of try to implement that. But of course that does not go in the kind of more expansive logic that maybe you saw more kind of flourishing when Donatella was talking about what else one could do, especially now talking about who produces what kind of sources. But it would rather be kind of get the easy hold on who is actually present at these events that interest us the most, given some kind of sampling strategy.
Yes. I think these are very important questions and requires a different answer in terms of which are the advantages and what the method adds. If we consider protest event analysis or if we consider ethnography. Because I think that these are the two fields in which these methods can be offer advantages, but also, of course, have different type of challenges. In terms of the protest event analysis, Sebastian, it is true that there are variables that are not used very much, but very often it is because they are the variables on which there are less informations. It's more the missing value type of problems. And here, the video analysis could help completing or filling in gaps. But I think what is much more rich, and for this you don't have to collect information on all the event, but just on a few, is about analysis of interactions. So how different actors interact, analysis of the sequences and the evolution. So one of the results of the research was protest events start in a way and then end up in other potential ways. The symbols, so the analysis of that allows to see posters, to see flags to see all these elements, but also frame analysis, because on the Novax protest, I've used analysis of the documents produced by the organizations, and vis-à-vis this type of product, the discourses, so the speeches at demonstrations add a lot, because it is different strategies for the activist. Vis-à-vis the ethnography, instead, I think the advantage could be that you look at past events, that you look at distant events, that you look at risky events, but also that combining different sources, you can have a more complete visions than if you just go and watch a part of the protest. And also you have more events, you can observe more events in terms of numbers. Then there are the cons, so then there are also the disadvantages and the different potential also use of the bias, which I think is important. Today we listen to ways in which also traditional forms of protest event analysis respond to different research questions in traditional social movement studies and in communication studies. So we assume usually in protest event analysis the journalistic account as sources. In communication studies you say, what? But this is biased by definition. And I think that's, in this sense, also for the video-enhanced protest event analysis, what will be fruitful is also to develop these two different visions, because I think also addressing Yannis' comments on the possibilities to know more about the strategies of the users, I think there are cases in which this could be done and useful, because there are strategic uses of images by those who organize a choreography of protest. But on the other hand, it would be interesting to see, in some cases, the different type of motivations behind. In other cases, what is interesting, for instance, if I think about Simon and Stefan's analysis of the escalations of the protest in Hamburg, the idea was to try to find reliable sources and to collect them so that you could cover the different aspects and parts of the demonstrations.
Okay.
Could I make one intervention before we do the next question?
Yes, a short intervention, because, I mean, as you remember, we started a little late,
Yeah.
so I would say we still have 5 minutes for a short intervention by you, then very short
Can I also say
questions.
something very short?
You get the last word, maybe. But
Time
please,
is
Jen.
flying.
So let me offer, while we're talking about selling, maybe a rebranding of the VPEA as visual protest event analysis, because I'm not sure that it always is going to require video to accomplish what you want. And there's a lot of still images that, so I think actually where you see probably the biggest divergence between what you would need to do the extractive versus the more reconstructive is, for the reconstructive, you probably do need video, but to really augment protest event analysis in a more extractive way, you can probably use, so if you ask yourself, would I prefer one still image on every single event, or a ton of videos on one major event in Berlin? If you're doing the extractive stuff, you want one image on every single protest, and you'll give up all the deep stuff on the big event in Berlin. If you want the constructive, then you need it really deep. And so I think maybe a way to think about this is that you're really getting us into the visual protest event analysis, where you can make use of stills versus videos. How intensive that needs to be probably depends more on how you're going to use it.
Yeah. Very good comment. So we rebrand the product before we actually release it, but that's,
I'm not sure.
as I said, potentially. So I still have Hans-Jörg. Who else wanted? And 2 more. Okay, so we can have 3 short interventions.
Okay, does this work?
Yes.
Excellent. We are discussing very much protest event analysis as an opportunity here for doing conflict research. I think there's also a phenomenon behind, which is simply the visualization of conflict. And to repeat a point I made this morning, I still think that protest event analysis is insufficient to understand this new phenomenon with wide-reaching consequences of the visualization of protest. And what we learn through protest event analysis remains actually very technical. So we understand better the dimensions and manifestations of protest. We are finally able to count the participants. The big questions were at 100,000 or 200,000. Through visual analysis, we can finally establish this. And we understand the motivations of the protesters maybe better. But what we don't understand is these new forms of engagement with video material, with visuals, which include broader audiences. We need to understand the affordances of the platforms much better. And we also need to understand the demands of particular audiences for visual material. This comes in addition, and I think this is crucial. If you take, for instance, the example of videos of extreme violence as an example, that was Yanis referred to this. If we wish to understand this, I think the event as such should not be analyzed at all. To analyze the event would be completely traumatic for the coders who would never get ethical clearance for such a research. But what we need to understand here is precisely how people engage with these videos, how they relate to it, how not only protesters, but broader publics, even states, engage with this type of material, and then broader processes of diffusion. So all this kind of reaches beyond protest event analysis.
Thank you. Then here is the second mic, okay?
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say something about the question on what do we do with the images. And I think it is possible to analyze the videos as, especially professional videos, as a story, and to have a stage of inductive coding where we understand what is the general story that is told, and then you arrive at a level of saturation, and then you can use the inductive codes for deductive coding. And I did that during the anti-vax protests. I actually did ethnographic research offline and then online. And I think that's also important for selecting videos and finding videos, because sometimes you only know by being there which organizations might have videos as well online. And those videos, especially during anti-vax, were only available in Facebook groups. Or not on YouTube, and you wouldn't find them on YouTube because they were deleted from YouTube. So I think actually combining that, working together with like classic ethnography and then online and protest event analysis could be very fruitful.
Thanks a lot. And then Miriam, the final comment question. No, but for the online crowd, it's good that you use the mic.
Yes, thanks a lot for the inputs. I think my question actually ties a bit in what has already been said, but it's about the selection of the material, and also just thinking about, are we analyzing kind of what is depicted or the depiction? So are we analyzing like what kind of material is it? Is it material that is open source, or is it material that was produced? Is it artistic? Because visual or video can also be something that was intentionally produced, right? But nowadays with all like kind of these, you have body cameras on police, you have you can take out your phone and make a video. And I think this is also a crucial differentiation that should be done in the selection of the material and then kind of in the contextualization for the analysis.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I will refrain from saying too much, and the others have, if they want, Jennifer already says it's fine. So we have two that still have a minute maybe to kind of pick and choose. And of course, afterwards, there is still room to maybe then continue this conversation.
Just 1 minute. I think that's the complexity of and the richness of the video analysis is that you don't only have visuals, you also have words, you have also text, and you have interactions, you have the dimensions of the sequences. And so I think that it is open to different type of analysis and interpretations, but that we still have to work on how.
Yeah, at the risk that this is a drastic comment for the end, but like I just wanted to respond to Manuela's cautioning against these biases that are little understood. And I would just propose a counter argument that I think we should not kind of stay in the cave just because we're used to knowing how the cave looks like, especially not in a context where those writing about the cave, meaning journalists, more and more themselves actually rely on these very videos, right? So we understand all of their biases of reporting, but they themselves are less and less present at events because the coverage of events increases, which we know from our event data. We have more and more reports, which doesn't mean, you know, that there's more and more reporters. It does mean that they have less and less information, so they also rely on videos. So the question would be, why should we rely on a bias that we think we understand rather than trying to code from the primary source ourselves, where at least to a certain extent we can control for the biases ourselves, which we simply cannot do with journalists. And I think I think this perspective shift is not only important for like what happens from now on and in the future, where it's more and more mediatized, but also looking back at historical data. And I think some of these biases, we don't quite understand them as well as we think we do, especially not when they're temporally bound. And I'm just thinking also about other ways of working on event analysis, like Neil Catchley's work on historical documents, who finds out that who applies techniques that have been developed against methodological explanations of bias and reapplies them to historical archives of the 1910s and 20s and finds completely different biases, like where were railway and telegraph lines, how was information transmitted at those times. So completely different biases that are little understood. So I think for different temporal cases, we need also a different explanation and research into these biases, but that shouldn't prevent us, I think, from engaging into that. So I tried to positive twist at the end.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you all. I mean, also, I'm sorry that we now did not respond to all of the comments, but luckily we have a video recording, so we can do that
analyze
also
it if you
later.
want.
Exactly, we can analyze it, but that also brings me to a big thank you to all the technicians that also helped kind of bringing this to the online crowd and, as said, having us a copy that we can look at later on. So thanks a lot for your patience and your engagement here in the room. Thanks again for the panelists, and then I wish you all a good evening in kind of rainy, grayish Berlin. Luckily, at least the conference participants also get some good food, I hope, and I hope you at home also get something nice. Thanks a lot.